unanimously. We'll go to the regular agenda. And how many people would like to speak on the regular agenda?
Well, we have to call the item first.
Right, that would be item number 7. And that is on the schedule. Consider the final report and presentation of the advisory task force on justice and gender. Take related actions recommended by the task force as outlined in the memorandum of the county administrative officer.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Caput and members of the board. Today we have an item before you to consider the final recommendations of the advisory task force on justice and gender. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce Dr. Susan Green, who's been facilitating the task force these past 2 years. As many of you are aware, Dr. Green has been working in the criminal justice system for over 20 years. She has conducted and published a number of studies on women in jail with a focus on their social histories, risk factors that contribute to their incarceration, and what women face upon release in jail. She was the founding director of the GEMMA program and is currently a research associate up at UCSC. And in 2017, she presented a report that was supported by the Sheriff's Office entitled Gender Matters, a Profile of Women in Santa Cruz County Jail. The board responded to that report and presentation by convening this task force, and today members of the task force are here to present their final recommendations. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Susan Green.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Caput and members of the board. I want to thank you for convening this advisory task force on justice and gender. Our presentation today marks the end of a 2-year term of this task force, and I want to start by asking task force participants to please stand and be recognized for your participation and full dedication in our efforts to address the unique needs of women cycling through our criminal justice system. It is truly an honor to work and walk alongside these justice and health leaders. I also want to extend thanks to Nicole Coburn, Assistant County Administrative Officer, for your participation and support during these 2 years, and to Senior Administrative Analyst Sven Stafford, who also contributed and was there every time. Thank you, Supervisor Leopold, for serving as the board's representative and showing up regularly. I want to thank my research assistant, Jennifer Hill, for her commitment and hours of research behind the scenes. And I again want to acknowledge the Sheriff's Office for supporting the Gender Matters research. I want to recognize the Marriott's Fairfield Inn and Suites on 41st Avenue, where they generously hosted most of our meetings because they also support our mission, as well as the Inn at Pasatiempo, who donated their space as backup for a couple of meetings too. We started with 19 appointed representatives, and nearly all made it a priority to come every month. Over time, new partners attended and then came regularly, and our final few meetings on reentry, healthcare, and prevention had up to 30 and 40 participants. The level of engagement of this group of incredible women and a few good men has been truly remarkable. Thank you all for stepping up. We discussed various topics with a gender lens, that is from the perspective of women and the effects on them and their children, and with sensitivities to the intersections of race, class, culture, sexual orientation, and sexual identity. Looking at these practices and policies from a woman's point of view is especially important because the criminal justice system was designed by men for men and largely overlooks women's differences. One of the core values of this task force has been to include people with lived experience in the criminal justice system to ensure that our reform efforts are successful at reducing harm. Nothing about us without us is a quote we have embraced, and there were several representatives on the task force who brought statistics to life and are models of resilience, healing, and transformation. They are also experts and made valuable contributions to the recommendations that you'll hear today. It is their experiences and the courage to share them that task force members have consistently highlighted as the most valuable and informative aspect of our work together. Sadly, women's experiences are often stories of survival, of gender-based violence and pain, raw and real trauma, and recurring. We've talked a lot about trauma over these 2 years, and we tried to be trauma-informed in our own meetings. To that end, I want to acknowledge that much of what you will hear today is painful. And it is important that we not forget or walk away or shy from hearing it in order to instigate positive change and to heal. I encourage people to please reach out to your support networks as needed. We are here today to present recommendations that mark important steps toward expanding effective substance use disorder treatment, reducing sexual assault and domestic violence, and addressing gender-specific needs in the judicial process, as well as preventing incarceration. Our first recommendation requests that the Sheriff's Office and Health Services Agency coordinate screenings for medication-assisted treatment, also called MAT, develop a pilot program to provide MAT in custody, and ensure that equal access, outreach, and education is provided to women. 84% of the women profiled in Gender Matters struggled with addiction. Their high rates of sexual and domestic victimization are inextricably linked to their addictions and incarceration. I'd like to introduce Amanda Magana to speak to this recommendation.
Good morning, Board. My name is Amanda Ingledrum Magana. I'm the Director of Medication-Assisted Treatment at Janus of Santa Cruz. Medication-assisted treatment is a standard of care for treating individuals with opioid use disorders. This includes using one of 3 FDA-approved medications: methadone, buprenorphine, or naltrexone. Janus has been the sole provider of medication-assisted treatment at the Santa Cruz County Jail for 15 years, where we have provided methadone for jail staff to dispense to enrolled Janus Community Clinic or Janus South County patients. We are also able to do intakes on incarcerated pregnant women who use opioids. But other than those few women, no one else has access to starting treatment while incarcerated. As we know, a number of women involved with the criminal justice system suffer from mental health and substance use issues. They go into jail having those issues and are released to the community where that cycle of use and crime starts again. This drives our nation's crime rate, and the most vulnerable remain sick. Not only that, but individuals released from jail are some of the most likely to overdose. Studies indicate that in the 2 weeks post-release from jail, individuals are anywhere from 40 to 129 times more likely to die from a drug overdose than the general population. The jail setting is a unique and ideal place to screen for substance use disorders. We can offer and start treatment using medications. Jails and prisons are increasingly doing this across the country. Offering medication-assisted treatment to individuals with opiate use disorder is an evidence-based, best practice form of treatment. Long-term treatment using methadone and buprenorphine has been shown to reduce drug use, overdose, mortality, crime, and recidivism. In Santa Cruz County, we have worked to build a comprehensive system where no door is the wrong door to access and start treatment for individuals with substance use disorders. This includes partnerships with primary care, our emergency departments, hospitals, and substance use treatment facilities, both in North and South County, all of whom offer buprenorphine. We have successfully built a system that can meet with individuals the very next day upon release so that there is no interruption in treatment. The missing link in this no wrong door approach has been starting treatment in the jails. We are passionate about this next step of our mission to save lives, reduce suffering, and help build a safer community. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And we want to recognize that we are aware this is not the first or the last conversation on providing medication-assisted treatment in custody, but this one is with a gender lens, recognizing women's differences. We're encouraged to hear that efforts to make this happen are well underway, and also recognize that Sheriff Hart has been in support of providing Matt in custody for many years. Our next recommendation focuses on reducing risk of sexual assault upon release from jail. Fortunately, our jail in Santa Cruz no longer releases women at midnight. However, women still report being released late in the day, sometimes after dinner, with no place to go but the streets. I'd like to invite Elisa Dukiwag to speak to this recommendation.
Hi. I'd like to preface this statement with, this is written by a woman who's a current resident of the Gemma House, and she has given me the privilege of reading her words. And I'd like to say that these words, even being written, are proof of a lot of healing and growth. My name is Natalie, and I am a current resident of the Gemma program. I have struggled with a substance use disorder for many years, over which I have had numerous experiences with the justice system. The issue I would like to speak to this morning is in regards to preventing sexual assault and relapse for women upon their release from either jail or from their hold and booking by eliminating or minimizing evening releases or early morning releases and coordinating with resources in our community, like Monarch Services, to help ensure that all women being held in custody are aware that they have a safe place to go when released unexpectedly, or during times that make them vulnerable to victimization. Unfortunately, I have direct experience with the consequences of being released in the early morning and early evening, without a plan and with no idea of where to go but the streets. Several years ago, after being released from Elmwood Jail in San Jose in the early evening hours, without information about emergency shelter resources or proper attire to keep warm, I found myself desperate, scared, and willing to take shelter behind a row of bushes along the street with a man willing to look after me and provide me with some extra layers of clothes and drugs stipulated upon a sexual exchange. Later that morning, I met a pimp who was also willing to let me take shelter in his motel room with a similar set of expectations, which led me to being violently raped and beaten by numerous men. I was strangled, beaten in the face and body, and left severely injured with a swollen face and completely red eyes from my blood vessels being burst. After being taken to the hospital less than 48 hours from my time of release from jail, I was told that I had cerebral contusions among a host of other injuries. I also had an experience in Santa Cruz County years ago where I was released in the early morning hours after being held in booking likewise, with no plan or information about emergency shelter resources or proper attire to keep warm. I found myself using drugs on the streets downtown with a man within an hour of my release, and later walking to my abusive ex-boyfriend's house to take shelter because I wanted to be off the streets and just didn't know where else to go. While I understand there are limitations when it comes to the resources that can be provided to women being released from custody, I feel that both minimizing or eliminating late night or early morning releases in unison with clear communication to the women in jail or booking around how to access the safety services like Monarch that are available are absolutely imperative in minimizing assault, relapse, and degradation of these women. I am one of these women. I have struggled with addiction and I have made many mistakes that have led to run-ins with the justice system. And I'm also a loving mother, a good friend, a hard worker, and a passionate and curious woman with the desire to learn, grow, and be a productive and happy human being. My only hope is that the justice system might find willingness to be more trauma-informed in their decisions in regards to the women being released who are vulnerable, scared, and generally just want to make their way back to a life worth living, a life to be proud of. Thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to have a voice. Natalie.
Hi. This is really hard to hear, yet we need to listen and not ignore what is being said and what is happening here in our county. As an advocate and representative of Monarch Services, I have seen firsthand the repercussions of women not having a safe place to be at night, and that includes a heightened risk of sexual assault, human trafficking, and relapse. Of the 31 women interviewed in the Gender Matters report, nearly half indicated that they did not have a safe place to live upon release. It is the recommendation of the task force to request that the Sheriff's Office and Probation Department work with Monarch Services to develop policies and protocols for an emergency release line to reduce the number of women being released from jail to the streets with no safe place to go and mitigate the associated risk of sexual assault and relapse and overdose. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. And Maria, that was Maria Luna from Monarch Services. And I want to also acknowledge again Natalie for sharing her story with us. She couldn't be here today. She had a visit with her son, which is exactly where she should be. Several women have expressed that finding their voice to share their stories as survivors of abuse reframes it and helps take the shame out of it. They have turned their stories of survival into experiences of empowerment, and they remind us of our shared humanity. Our next two recommendations are about addressing gender-specific needs in the judicial process. The majority of women in the Gender Matters study reported that they had experienced the incarceration of a parent as a child. And for many, separation from their own child is deeply traumatic to both their children and themselves. Colleen McLaughlin is here to speak to this recommendation.
Good morning, board. My name is Colleen McLaughlin, and I am the Intake and Outreach Coordinator for the GEMA Transitional Housing Program. I work at the GEMA House and teach classes with women in the Blaine Street Women's Facility. We discussed these recommendations in classes last week, and the women had a lot to say about this recommendation and their own experiences. In 2 classes, we had a total of 15 women. 80% are mothers, and about half reported having a parent who had been incarcerated, which is consistent with the sample of women represented in the Gender Matters report. I'm here to share their voices. Some of the women asked me to use their names, others chose to remain anonymous. Women talked about their experiences as children of incarcerated parents. Elizabeth said, "My father was locked up in and out my whole life. I'm a daddy's girl, and it really affected me not having a father growing up. What helped me get through this experience? To be honest, nothing did." Another woman said, "I had a huge void. Not being ripped away from my family would have helped me. I numbed the pain away." Mothers also talked a lot about how incarceration has affected them as mothers, how their incarceration affects their children, and what they believe could help prevent these cycles of trauma and incarceration. Marissa said, "I feel as though my identity to be my son's mother has been stripped from both my son and I. I'm my son's only parent. His father passed away before he was born. I've been through a lot of traumatic events, which has made it difficult to stay positive and be successful in life." JD admitted, "My incarceration has affected my identity as a mother because I've had to shut down a part of me to survive being here away from my girls. I feel completely powerless. My 11-year-old finally came to visit. I refused to visit through glass at the main jail, and it took me 5 months to get to Blaine Street, so seeing her was emotional. Her last words were that she didn't want to leave." Another mom said, "Incarceration has directly impacted the healthy development of my 2-year-old son, as well as my experience with motherhood. At his age, physical contact, connection is his primary need." The women fully support the recommendation to consider diversion for parents of minor children to help reduce the trauma to both children and their parents. Jamie told us, "If a program were started, hopefully it involves self-love, parent therapy, family therapy, an in-house jail CPS worker to coordinate with the outside, self-defense classes, family mediation, scholarships, photos of moms for family at home, reentry coaching and mentorship, and housing a safe place. The connection is a must. We need therapy in jail. We are not our crimes. Thank you.
Morning. My name is Tara George, and I'm the Chief Deputy at the District Attorney's Office. For the last year, I've had the distinct honor and privilege of representing my office as a member of the Justice and Gender Task Force. The meetings would start, and Susan Green would have a PowerPoint. The last slide always read, "Nothing about us without us." Because Susan realized and recognized that we needed to have voices of experience at the table as we were discussing these matters. How were any of us that woke up in a warm bed, sitting at a conference room in Capitola with our Starbucks cups, going to be able to understand the experiences of women with lived experiences if we didn't hear from them? And every month went by. Every month, somebody with new experiences came and talked about the trauma that they experienced, their abuse, their recovery, their transformation. Family members would come and speak to the task force about being an indirect person involved in the criminal justice system because of the woman in their life. And as the months proceeded, those of us around the room began to share our own experiences. Those of us around the room realized that many of us were one mentor, one program, one moment, or one step away from being the voices of experience. And all of us realized that our own experiences drove the work that we do to help the members of the Santa Cruz community. When you are able to hear the experiences of women in Santa Cruz County as it relates to the justice system, we were able to realize that there are some things that we do well, some things that we completely fail at. There are some programs that we need to create and other things that we need to explore the creation of. You just heard from Ms. McLaughlin, who talked to you about the experiences of women who are currently incarcerated in the Santa Cruz County Jail and the effect that that incarceration has on themselves and their children. Recommendation number 3 from this task force is a request of this board to get criminal justice partners together in a room and have them discuss the creation or possibility of creating a primary caregiver diversion program. This recommendation stems from legislation that Governor Newsom passed in SB 394. That legislation allows counties to have the presiding judge meet with the prosecuting agency and the defense bar to consider the creation of this diversion program. Under this diversion programs, the individuals would qualify if they've committed a nonviolent, non-serious offense. They are the primary caregiver of a minor child at home. They are the sole or primary caregiver of care and financial support. The crime that they committed was not against that child. That incarceration would be detrimental to that minor child at home, and that there's no risk to public safety. This legislation arises from the research and experience that shows that when custodial parents are incarcerated, the children are exposed to the trauma of separation and household instability. Many of the children of incarcerated parents experience physical trauma, behavioral problems, economic instability, and many times homelessness. Parents, when they're eventually freed from incarceration, have financial instability where they struggle to maintain the economic support This legislation and this recommendation would allow for those that qualify the opportunity to trade incarceration for rehabilitation and services. There are many of us that grew up talking to our parents behind glass. There are many of us that received birthday cards and Christmas letters postmarked from a correctional facility. And there are some of us that were able to thrive. But there are many more that weren't able to. This recommendation merely asks this board to direct justice partners to have conversations to allow opportunities for many more to thrive.
Thank you, Tara. Our next recommendation to consider the creation of a women's court will be presented by Cassie Gazapura.
Good morning. I'm Cassie Gazapura with Monarch Services. Women's experiences and opportunities differ from men's, both within and outside of the criminal justice system. And data shows that their pathways into the justice system are often different from men's as well. Women are more likely to have suffered trauma from physical abuse, sexual assault, and other forms of violence. Dr. Green's Gender Matters report also highlighted the fact that for many of these women, the violence that they experience is pervasive and not an isolated incident. Women also have higher rates of mental illness and addiction. After working with hundreds of clients, I came to see a pattern in the women I represented. While each of their stories were unique, a staggering number of them had experienced some sort of trauma or abuse that resulted in instability, substance use, and/or mental health issues, and ultimately culminated in their contacts with the justice system. We also know that women respond to custody programming and supervision differently. Because the justice system is not designed to take into account trauma histories or gender power dynamics, women's trauma is often perpetuated through law enforcement contacts, courtroom interactions, and in jail or prison environments. Additionally, women's employment histories and access to job opportunities are different, and mothers generally have greater parenting responsibilities. Unfortunately, very little information about a woman's history is typically revealed during court processes. And when it it often comes out after she has already pled guilty, and the severity of punishment is all that remains to be determined. The criminal justice system, created for men and by men, is still dominated by men in power. Women's inclusion in this system was really just an afterthought. In the guise of treating people equally, women have been thrown into the justice system with little to no consideration of their unique needs. It shouldn't come as a surprise then that the results often aren't what we would hope. Now, that is not to say that the criminal justice system is working for men either, but it is especially deficient in its capacity to meet the needs of women and their families. In an effort to recognize gender differences and implement trauma-informed, gender-specific practices as early as possible in criminal proceedings, the task force requests that the District Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office, and Probation Department collaborate with the Santa Cruz Superior Court, State Parole Services, and Monarch Services to explore the creation of a women's court for women, by women. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Next, I'd like to introduce Lynn Boulay, who will speak to our next recommendation related to reducing domestic violence.
Good morning, board. Thank you for this opportunity. Victim safety and offender accountability have been central figures in the domestic violence field over the last few decades. As a result, we've seen significant expansion in crisis responses and legal intervention. While our crisis responses and legal interventions typically look like victims leaving and offenders going to jail, we see many survivors who want to keep their families together and the efforts they're making to find effective solutions that increase safety, support healing, and serve the whole family. We see people who use abuse to maintain power and control, that want compassionate help to change their behavior, and we see families struggling with the weight of multiple pressures and layers of oppression. Arresting someone for domestic violence does nothing to change the behaviors and often escalates the dangers to the survivor. Existing law specifies that the terms of probation granted to a person who's been convicted of domestic violence are required to include, among other things, successful completion of a 52-week batters program that requires the program to be completed within 18 months and allows no more than 3 excused absences. This model has been a one-size-fits-all for mitigating abusive behaviors, no matter the severity or longevity of the abuse. This model has been shown to be ineffective with a recidivism rate as high as 80%. And little or no accountability on the effectiveness of the programs. Assembly Bill number 372 authorizes 6 counties, including Santa Cruz, to offer an alternative program for individuals convicted of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a learned behavior, and it is acknowledged that most people convicted of domestic violence grew up in an abusive household, and that the majority experienced abuse themselves. With alternative approaches to ending abusive behaviors, those who have chosen to do harm will have an opportunity to look at their own histories of abuse and learn how to address their underlying issues and learn new, nonviolent ways to deal with conflict, frustration, and emotional pain.
Good morning. My name is Alyssa Thompson. I'm a lawyer with the Public Defender's Office. Consider these startling facts from the Gender Matters report. 3/4 of the women interviewed in custody had experienced domestic violence, and 2/3 of them said it was happening a lot. This is consistent with data that's collected across the country, confirming the link between experiencing domestic violence and future contact with the criminal justice system. Because the harm of domestic violence is not just the initial physical harm. It's a ripple effect. It carries on to instability, to emotional and mental health crisis. It can lead to substance abuse, and ultimately with future contacts with the criminal justice system. That's why it's so incredibly important for us to stop the cycle before it keeps going. For decades, the domestic violence probation has been exactly the same. It's 3 years of formal probation. It includes volunteer service. It includes a very large fine. It includes the Batterers Intervention Program. That is a 52-week class that typically costs over $1,000, for which, as you've heard, absences are generally minimally accepted. Doesn't matter if this is your first or third offense, doesn't matter if it's a misdemeanor or a felony offense, it's the same for everyone. Now imagine the person tasked with completing this ineffective and burdensome program is also the sole breadwinner of a family. We cannot ignore the reality that in many cases, partners stay together or at least co-parent. Once we recognize that, we start to see that the cost, the time commitment, and the inflexibility of this 52-week class are not just obligations on the probationer. They are burdens that fall squarely on the family that the system is supposed to be helping. These families, who so often are already barely making ends meet, are doing the best they can to cope. A missed class or a late payment means the probation violation, possibly jail time, losing a job, a cascading devastation of consequences for vulnerable families who just want to survive. Let me give you a real-world example. This family had only one car. The mother, who was 8 months pregnant and had 3 children, would pack everyone into the car to shuttle her partner to and from the classes every week for the year. She would do this because if he missed class, he risked being reincarcerated. They would lose their only source of income right before the birth of their 4th child. Another survivor was using the bulk of her own paycheck to pay for her partner's domestic violence classes because he lost his job after his employer found out about the incident, and they had no income besides hers. She did not want the father of her children to be reincarcerated for violating her probation by failing to attend this class. Advocates and legislatures have known for years that the Batterers Intervention Program is not working. That's why they've created this six-county pilot program that is AB 372. It gives us a 3-year window to try to innovate, to try to fix what's broken. Probation's first steps have been to create a matrix in which they sort offenders. They try to identify different needs and different risks. They try to match lower-level offenders with less burdensome obligations. The new opportunities include some shorter and some cheaper class options. The high-risk offenders are still asked to do the traditional, ineffective program. To build on the work that has already been done, we are asking that the board direct the probation department to conduct a survey of the willing probationers and their families, to learn directly from them whether what we're trying to do is working or not working. AB 372 is a unique opportunity to transform our approach and to end the cycle of domestic violence. It could mean meaningful support for these vulnerable families. Who better to tell us what's working than the people directly impacted? Please direct probation to talk to them. Nothing about us without us.
Thank you, Alyssa and Lynn, and to Assemblymember Mark Stone, who brought this legislation forward. He understands that if we can reduce violence against women, we can reduce the incarceration of women and men, we can reduce kids witnessing domestic violence, and we can reduce intergenerational cycles of pain. Our next recommendation focuses on working within our schools to prevent incarceration. 2/3 of the women in the Gender Matters study reported they'd been suspended or expelled from school, or both. Half spent time in juvenile hall or a group home. We haven't talked enough about girls in juvenile hall in Santa Cruz, and we must not forget them either. Fortunately, there are only a small handful. I think last time I asked there were 3, but that is 3 too many. And there are more effective ways to respond to and support youth who might be struggling. We have a team here from the County Office of Education to speak to this recommendation on prevention. I'd like to introduce Julius Mills Denty.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I come from the County Office of Education. I'm kind of responsible for doing some of the restorative practices work and some gang intervention as well. So let's get started. As an alternative to conventional criminal justice practices, which at times overlook the needs of those most intimately affected by conflict or harmed, restorative justice believes that those seemingly at odds with one another should have the opportunity to get together, reconcile their differences, and really get to the root of what led to the conflict in the first place. So schools who effectively implement restorative practices do 3 things really well. They focus on social emotional learning, which creates conditions for engagement. They utilize restorative justice when harm and conflict is present as a preventative measure that reduces further discipline and suspension, which we know now correlates well with juvenile justice system involvement. And they respond to student behavior that is challenging in a manner that is relationship affirming, accurate, and empathetic, as opposed to punitive, which can lead to defiance-related infractions, which also can lead to suspendable offenses. So when 2 young women at a school get in a fight in class and one suffers a blow to her abdomen which compromises her pregnancy, it's going to take a lot more than an ed code violation and a change in schedule to repair the harm upon returning to school, and that's where we come in. Concerning gender, 70 of the participants who've engaged in some restorative justice practice process over the last 3 years in both San Benito and Santa Cruz County, out of all 70, 55 of the participants have been young women, many of whom have come to the school for support before the conflict indeed did escalate. This suggests that, one, young women are willing participants in a process that's complex, difficult, and holds people accountable, and two, that they're willing to challenge a no-snitch code, which often keeps people silent and distant from one another and can increase violence. As a father of a 2.5-year-old daughter now, I think about it, and I only hope that my daughter demonstrates the strength when faced with social adversity than some of the young women I've had the privilege of working with have shown. So our recommendation is largely to expand the efforts that are already occurring at Sequoia High School, which is an alt-ed site in Watsonville, and also expand the efforts into comprehensive schools and some select alternative ed schools. I have a kind of a model of how to do that back there, but I didn't bring it up here. So if you want to see it, I guess we can chat some other time. But Soni's going to talk now about Sequoia School. Thanks.
Good morning, board members. Thank you for welcoming us here today. My name is Denise Soni Sanson. I'm a senior director at the county office, Educational Services Programs. This is a new assignment for me. I was previously the principal director at Sequoia Schools in Watsonville. Alternative education serves approximately 800 students across the county, from Felton to Watsonville. To put all of our programs geographically are spread out, but put all of those students together, and we're pretty regular sized high school for this county. I was asked to speak specifically about Sequoia Schools. It's our newest school, our only school that we own the building, Alternative Education, the county office. The school opened in 2016, and I was privileged to be a part of leading that effort. We have implemented restorative practices since the school's inception, and we have seen a dramatic decrease in suspensions, nearly down to 0, and an increase in student attendance. While these quantitative metrics highlight the success possible when schools take matters into their own hands, the attachment that students have to the school is the most important measure. I worked for alternative ed for 13 years, and that qualitative piece, harder to measure. Things like eye contact, things like coming to talk with a trusted adult about what might be going on at home. Those important metrics really demonstrate that our efforts there are working. Many of our students are experiencing trauma. Some have incarcerated parents, family members, or are part of the justice system themselves and are in and out of juvenile hall. Some of our students are struggling with substance abuse, gang activity, homelessness, many of the things that people have already spoken about today. Part of being restorative is really about addressing a student's social emotional needs and being able to separate the behavior from the person. 2 weeks ago, we had a mid-year graduation at Sequoia Schools, and a student who I met in 8th grade who came, what she defined, she came as a you need to leave or you'll be expelled type of situation. I met her in 8th grade. She's 19 now, and she graduated 2 weeks ago. I asked her, what contributed to you being able to be successful and get to this big accomplishment of your high school graduation? And she said, it was the teachers who supported me and believed in me. I didn't have family support, but you guys believed in me and told me I could do it. You also gave me another chance, lots of second chances. This particular student had been in fights, had brought a weapon to school, had many blowouts with other students and teachers. I actually asked if I could talk about her today, and she said, absolutely. I'm not gonna say more about her than that, but just that for me, what that means is giving people second chances, particularly children, because they make mistakes. I'm a mother of 4 boys, and they make a lot of mistakes. And so being able to give children, because that's what they are, second chances, third chances, 10th chances, that's what alternative education is about, and helping them work through those conflicts that Julius was talking about, and keeping them at school. Lastly, I'll just add that Sequoia Schools we've been able to successfully address issues when physical violence or threats of physical violence occur without law enforcement. That doesn't mean that we don't involve law enforcement for substance or weapons or physical altercations. We have developed a relationship with the sheriffs, with the SRO, that largely they allow us to, it's our jurisdiction to make those decisions, knowing we're a restorative practices school, knowing that we have systems in place, knowing that we make referrals to counseling or substance classes, substance abuse classes, things like that. And so our efforts we're trying to keep students out of the system, essentially. Is Celeste Gutierrez here? I'm going to read her last part. So lastly, in California, the statewide ban of suspensions for willful defiance has sparked a demand for skilled interpersonal interventions when challenging situations arise. According to the ACLU, students suspended or expelled are nearly 3 times more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system the following year. Though the correlation between suspensions and juvenile justice has become common knowledge, many schools are still at a loss when trying to replace the use of suspension with a more relational approach. Not only does restorative practices offer a process for reconciliation, repair, and resolution, it also offers creative responses for responding to defiance and resistance. Instead of viewing the defiant and non-compliant as fixed characteristics, a restorative school looks at them as having important underlying themes, including a desire for independence, mistrust, or wariness towards authority. Lastly, because law enforcement has a presence on school campuses in this county, schools must find ways to utilize their presence effectively. When matters that jeopardize school safety occur, their role becomes clear. Yet when law enforcement is employed to handle low-level school discipline issues, in-house matters can be quickly conflated with legal punishment. When schools outsource school discipline issues to law enforcement, they may be turning over the student to the juvenile justice system and undermining their own authority. That said, when law enforcement personnel engages in restorative justice, they are showing a commitment to connect before correct. It is also fair to hypothesize that they will be better equipped to constructively use their authority and delineate between matters that are very serious and matters that are more interpersonal by nature. I'll just say lastly that my personal experience at Sequoia High Schools with restorative practices, if you ever have an opportunity to sit in a circle with young people and other adults, because we're included as well, it's incredibly impactful, and I would even say life-changing. Thank you.
Buenos dias, good morning. I'm Teresa Carino, and I'm co-chair for the Santa Cruz Women's Commission, and I'm also representing Salud y Cariño and the young girls that we serve. As a woman who has experienced trauma in my youth and who has been working with youth for over 20 years, I know firsthand what prevention and healing practices such as restorative justice can offer a young person. Girls especially can benefit from practices that validate their emotions and struggles and give them a platform to use their voices that are all too often silenced. Help us amplify the voices of young women, promote healing, and prevent further trauma by supporting the Justice and Gender Task Force recommendation to implement restorative justice practices as part of the Comprehensive School Safety Program recently funded through the Justice Assistance Grant. I would also like to take a moment to say what an honor it has been to serve on this task force, and also to thank Dr. Susan Green, our fearless leader.
Thank you, Teresa and Sony and Julius. It's important to hear stories of success. Of course, very important to continue to talk. We talk about working upstream. We always have to talk about prevention and how to intervene earlier. and we can never give up and never lose hope. Our next recommendation is related to data. In order to establish where gender differences are most pronounced in the criminal justice system, data must be collected in a way that can be disaggregated by gender. We know that challenges persist with collecting and sharing data across systems. And as we continue conversations to develop strategies to overcome some of these challenges, the task force requests that recognizing gender differences be included in data collection and reporting. Our final recommendation to establish a commission on justice and gender will be presented by Laura Segura.
Good morning, everyone. So the task force final recommendation, like Susan said, is to establish a commission on justice and gender to replace the Domestic Violence Commission. So I would just want to provide a few insights about the DV Commission, as I'm the former and the most recent chair of that commission. I was involved with the commission for about 9 years until we stopped meeting. In the early years of the commission, the DV Commission set out some pretty ambitious goals based on trends and needs at that time. The commission was effective in many ways, having representation from many different sectors in the community. And the commission, however, also faced many challenges in the latter years. And part of it was, firstly, because it was focused on only domestic violence. And gender-based violence is not siloed to only domestic violence. It's complex, it's multidimensional, and includes the various types of violence and trauma that women face, including very high rates of sexual violence, both in and out of the jail system. And then secondly, the engagement was inconsistent and also not conducive to our goals. We needed to have the voices of survivors and those most impacted by violence, including people of color. I remember I was one of the I came into the DV Commission for the first time ever, and I actually thought I was in the wrong meeting because I did not see people who looked like me. And so that was a stark reality for me about this commission, but it changed over the years, thank goodness. And lastly, the Domestic Violence Commission also lacked the necessary resources and the staffing to roll out the work and make it effective. So learning from those lessons and the strengths of this task force, we have an opportunity to engage diverse perspectives and bold new approaches to interrupt the cycles of pain, abuse, addiction, and incarceration for women and their families. We also need to do this from a holistic and gender and racial equity lens. Survivor voices with firsthand experiences in the criminal justice system were key in this process and helped shape all our recommendations. In the 18 meetings over the past 2 years, the task force examined a wide range of issues and developed recommendations that plant seeds to better meet the needs of justice-involved women and their children. The level of engagement from community leaders, in my opinion, was very impressive. Some meetings had up to 40 people in attendance. We had engagement from community leaders who work in systems and also recognize that we can do better to stop the intergenerational cycle of incarceration. Therefore, the task force recommends that the board direct the CAO's office to return with an ordinance establishing a commission on gender and justice and gender in place of the Domestic Violence Commission that will help oversee the implementation of the task force recommendations and continue to respond to and better meet the needs of justice-involved women and their families. The commission will also address gaps in areas of needs identified during the term of the task force, including outreach and education, gender-specific trainings, gender-specific treatment, and supporting families directly impacted by the criminal justice system. And I also recommend personally, based on my experience from the Domestic Violence Commission, to have adequate staffing and resources to help us advance this work. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you again to all of our presenters today. This concludes our presentation. And as you could see and hear, we have a powerful and passionate team of leaders. I want to thank you, board members, again for convening this advisory task force on justice and gender and for recognizing the importance of this work. We are not done, and we are not alone in our efforts. We're part of a movement of women and men across the state and nation, also working to reduce the incarceration of women and girls, to strengthen families directly impacted by the criminal justice system, and to do less harm. I often say there are at least two things that keep me inspired to continue this work after 25 years. One, the more I learn, the harder it is to walk away and pretend it's not my problem. And second, there are thousands of formerly incarcerated women and men who are leading reform efforts. And working in partnership with these local leaders, I'm as motivated as ever. Thank you for supporting this important effort. We're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll bring it back to the board for questions and comments. I would say that we do have a 10:45 Zone 7 meeting, so if we could keep our comments a little bit shorter.
Sure. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead. Want to go first, John? Sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. As people can see, this task force did not take any issue lightly. We had always had thoughtful presentations, involved discussions, and these recommendations are reflections of dozens of members of the task force work. This wasn't just a small cadre of the task force. These are really the task force recommendations. I want to thank our board for taking the issue of justice-involved women seriously enough to spend as much time as we have at board meetings talking about these issues and committing the resources to empanel the task force. It shows a real commitment to these issues, and I was grateful to be the representative on this task force because I got to see this work mature and blossom during these last 2 years. I want to thank all the task force members. This was not a group that was checking the box and coming to a meeting once a month. This was an engaged group who reached out within their own organizations to make sure that people, not just the one individual, but if there would need to be other individuals from that organization involved, that they would bring those individuals, and for those agencies or organizations that help reach out and find speakers with lived experience that could share their stories with us to make the statistics that we read so frequently real and present for us in the room. What we heard was complicated, heartbreaking, but as you can see with these recommendations, there are some responses that we can make happen that will actually help improve our systems. I'm impressed by the agencies and organizations and individuals who have stepped up already and are committed to making our system work better. We've heard recommendations, this is the second time we've heard recommendations at our board, but in between agencies like our Human Services Department or our Sheriff's Department or the DA's office, there's been awareness of some of the issues, and there's been efforts already underway to address some of these pieces. So that tells me that we have a committed group of leaders who understand these issues and want to make progress on it. I think that it's important, I won't go through these recommendations. I thought the presentation did a great job, and I hope that we all heard the thoughtful presentation and understand the significance of each and every one of these recommendations. These are achievable, but they will take work. They will take resources. They will take some time. But if we are committed to making our system work better, to ending intergenerational incarceration in Santa Cruz County, to improve the lives of women in our system, and to stop a revolving door for some, we will have accomplished a lot. And so having a commission on justice and gender to be able to oversee these recommendations, to continue to delve into these issues, will make a huge difference in the success of the efforts that have been outlined here today. I want to thank Susan Green for her work in this. As you saw today, there was no meeting that wasn't thoughtfully prepared, that involved lots of other meetings. This wasn't just, I'll call this person up and he'll get somebody, but it was really interviewing speakers, talking to people ahead of time, preparing materials, sending it to us in advance so we could have informed discussions. That is a standard of which we should all strive for. And it made each and every one of the task force meeting meaningful and thoughtful. And it's why this task force grew in size over 2 years instead of drop in size, as you can often see with a monthly group that meets once a month for 2 years. So I urge the adoption of these recommendations by our board, and I urge the County Administrative Office to work on an ordinance that can bring this to us. The commitment that you've already shown by Ms. Colburn's and Sven Stafford's participation in this is a good sign of commitment, and I hope we can continue this to really make our justice system work better. I am hopeful that we can do it, and I know that we have the experience where we've changed the arc of our justice system to make it work better for young people, and now we should do it thoughtfully for women. Thank you for the work.
Go ahead. Thank you. So I don't have any questions because I thought the report was thorough and powerful and incredibly well thought out. I just want to take a moment and thank everyone who served, because these recommendations, I think, are based in data, but then also paired with lived experience and real world impacts. And so you can see how the system could start working, not only in our county, but what I'm hopeful is this serves as a model for other counties in California and other states across the country, because I think that the group that came together and put so much time and energy into this did it so well that as we implement this, overseen by this the new commission, that we can be a model for so many places going forward, and not only impact the lives of women here in our county and their families, but also around the country. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you for putting together such a good process, the right people in the room, people with the thoughtfulness and courage to talk about their experiences and share their experiences, and then a willingness to continue the conversation and continue the work going forward. So I just thank you very much.
Yeah, I want to thank you for a very telling, impressive presentation. It's obvious that this is going to take a lot of cooperation, a lot of time. It already has taken a lot of time, and there already has been a lot of cooperation, which is really good to see. I think that going forward, and we need to have an evaluation of the funding and resources and how we would do this. And we're going to do this. It's not a cost factor, but I want to know, to have in that formula, how much are we saving when these young women or women in general are not incarcerated again and cost us something. I mean, if the repetition of somebody going back into the judicial system or the jail system is reduced, that's well, it's terrific, just socially. And to start with, but financially it is too, and we have to measure that. I think people would want to see that. It's not the most important factor, but it's a factor that we really need to spell out in this whole thing. I want to thank those who have presented today, but just the cooperative effort between the education community, the judicial community, and the faith-based community as well. And that's a reach that we can have, it's a place where we can have another reach to have an impact on some of these women, many of them young, has been explained. But I'm just thoroughly impressed with the work that you've done to get us here. I'm very encouraged and enthusiastic to carry this forward to see how we can complete a real corrective system before the incident happens, so to speak. Are there any existing women in court systems in the state of California right now? I think you were talking about that. There was one of the recommendations.
As far as I know, there is a women's court in Los Angeles County, I believe. As you can see in the language in the recommendation, this is a recommendation to explore, to consider, to have a conversation, and see if this is something that might be part of our collaborative courts here in Santa Cruz County, and it might not. There are lots of issues to consider, right, and we will certainly learn more about any other models that exist.
And what do you expect from the legislation authored by Assemblyman Mark Stone about the domestic violence victims? Is there a report back or a time period where we're going to have some sense of those 6 counties and what's the impact of what that legislation?
So the legislation is a 3-year pilot and does require a significant amount of data collection. I'm sure the probation department could speak more to that. I know that the probation department has been leading the effort locally along with judicial system partners to begin to create an alternative pilot program, and we really recognize and appreciate the progress that has been made in these early months. And I believe that is there a report? I can't remember, I'm sorry, if there's a date on that recommendation. I don't have it in front of me.
There is,
Yes.
December 2020.
Thank you. So for getting some input from families and people directly involved in the classes in the alternative programs are being offered, we've asked for an update or a report by 2020, and recognize that the time frame for somebody to be engaged in these new efforts is still small. So this is, it's early to start collecting data, but it can still inform the process. And I know Assemblymember Stone, who came and presented and spoke to us at one of our task force meetings, is counting on Santa Cruz County to do better. So I encourage you to follow this and see what the data show over the coming years of this pilot program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the remarkable group of people that came together for this. It's an exceptionally diverse and talented group of people, and shows what happens when you can put that group into the room for positive gain. And Dr. Green, I did have one question of you, if I may, in regards to the new proposed commission. The language within the staff report spoke about the replacement of the Domestic Violence Commission. The Domestic Violence Commission, as Ms. Segura noted, served an incredibly important function at its beginning, especially with local law enforcement, to be able to inform their practices. And I recognize that over time, it met some challenges. I wanted to be assured, though, because the language in the report wasn't really clear, that the new commission, that really what this is an expansion and enhancement of the scope of the previous Domestic Violence Commission, that it's still fully intended to maintain that as one of the tenets of what's researched, just not in a siloed format as it was previously. Because I think it's important for the board to know that this is our intention. I imagine it was your intention as well, but it just didn't end up in the report with that specific language. I want to be clear when we're creating a new ordinance that we're specifically calling out that that is one of the things that we're looking to have this new commission consider.
Yes, thank you. I think as you heard today, gender-based violence is at the core of this work. And the recommendation to create a commission on justice and gender is an effort to revive and restructure the Domestic Violence Commission that has been dormant for a number of years, to make sure that we can respond to domestic violence as well as other issues that justice-involved women are facing in our community. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
I'm thanking you also. We're gonna open it up to the public, and we do have a 10:45 Zone 7 flood meeting, so hi, Marilyn. Anyway, we'll give you 3 minutes in the beginning, and then we may have to change that for a small.
Thank you. Very impressive.
How many people do want to speak?
Very,
so you got 3 minutes, so.
Very impressive report. Thank you so much. And I hope you listened to the comments of people here. It was both informative and disturbing. I think of the kind of society we live in that promotes violence. And I have a cartoon here. I have a few copies that says the point. Feeling sad and depressed, and there's a young medic writing on the clipboard. Are you anxious, worried about the future? Feeling isolated and alone? You might be suffering from capitalism. Symptoms include unemployment, hunger, homelessness, incarceration is on this list. So we have a symptom problem here. Also, I wanted to recommend, there's a book called Incarceration Nation. We have a huge, some of the highest incarceration in this country, and people who really don't belong in jail. I recommend the movie Just Mercy that is at the Del Mar about a Black man who was on death row, accused of murder, totally innocent. It's a true story, and the lawyer who represented him and the trauma to the family, like what you described. Let's see. Also, I listened to Ralph Nader Radio Hour, and there's the corporate crime reporter on, and I'd like to see the corporate criminals in jail more than somebody who's smoking pot, for instance. The militarism in this society, the violence of the military, the videos, the TV that children watch is very influential in this violence. And last, I want to recommend a talk by Dr. Carl Merritt on wireless technology, Can It Harm You? And it's going to be Saturday, February 1st. I have a flyer, Scotts Valley Library at 1 to 3. Some of the symptoms of exposure to these microwaves have to do with neurobehavioral, neuropsychiatric problems, behavior disorders, anxiety. A lot of the symptoms we see are related to this exposure. And I hope you can attend that, and the board members too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marilyn.
Good morning, Chair Caput, Board of Supervisors, Jim Hart, Sheriff Coroner. And I just wanted to talk to you about a few things. First of all, I really appreciate the work that Dr. Green and the Justice and Gender Committee did. I think this is an outstanding report. I support the recommendations in this report. I do want to have some clarifying language, though, because we've been working on medication-assisted treatment in the jail for the last year. There's a request for proposal that it's being responded to now. It's going to take effect on July 1. And under recommendation 1 in the report, it's indicated that a pilot program for MAT be established in the jail. We're going into a 3-year contract with our next medical provider, and so I just don't want the pilot language to conflict with what's in the contract, and so hopefully the board will consider that and maybe do some language cleanup on that. And then under recommendation number 7, there's a report back that's due on August 20th. My office plays a big role in this, as we have a very robust records management system in the jail that does collect a lot of data. And so I'm not clear on this recommendation what it is that is being asked for. And so if I could get some clarification on that, we're happy to participate. But some of these data requests that come in are massive, and it takes us some time to put that together. And so if we can get involved in that conversation far ahead of the August deadline, that'd be very, very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Sheriff Hart, on the question about the MAT, I know that you have been very good on this issue, and I think when you look at a pilot program and a 3-year contract, a pilot is not going to just be 6 months or a year. It's probably going to take a little bit of startup, doing it and assessing it. So I'm trying to get an idea of what it is you're looking for in terms of language and where that wouldn't work out with.
And maybe County Council can help us with that. I just didn't want, I think of a pilot as like a 6 to 12 month program. I just didn't want the language to conflict with our contract. So if County Council doesn't believe that's a problem, I just want to make sure before you voted on this that it was clarified.
Sure.
Thank you.
And the other question, and maybe it's really one for Ms. Coburn or Mr. Palacios about the CAO's work around collecting data, getting some clarity around that. I think that the idea was to have the CAO bring the departments together to figure out what it is that could be done.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. I think between now and August, we would meet and talk about, kind of come up with a framework for what's going to happen. I don't foresee we're going to have everything disaggregated by August, but we can meet and work out the plan for trying to address this recommendation.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the Sheriff's Office for always making staff available. It really made a difference. It was really helpful in our first year to have representatives there and participate in the discussions. And in the second year, to have a variety of people from the jail who could participate and share information. It was very helpful to the group.
Good morning, Supervisors. Dr. Gail Newell, Health Officer for the County of Santa Cruz. And I want to thank the Justice and Gender Task Force for the good and important work that they've done over the past 2 years. I've been able to attend a couple of their meetings since starting as Health Officer and was very impressed with Dr. Green's commitment and the commitment of the entire task force. I'm very grateful for their insight and willingness to address the issues of substance use disorder as a gender-based matter, especially in our incarcerated populations. The treatment of substance use disorder, including the provision of medically assisted treatment, or MAT, is important for everyone impacted by addiction, but it's especially important for those who are incarcerated. I also appreciate the efforts of Janice in their ability to provide continuing MAT services for their established patients and for an initiation of new MAT for our pregnant incarcerated persons. I want to reiterate the Sheriff's absolute commitment. He's been a consistent supporter of MAT in our jail populations over his entire 5-year tenure as sheriff to date, and before that as well. I, as health officer, have also worked with the current medical provider in the jails to support MAT services and encourage them. And in my former position with San Benito County, I worked at a statewide level to establish MAT in the jails with our current medical provider, WellPath, who provides services in 31 counties in California. I also want to say that I helped establish the wording in the current RFP for medical and mental health services to provide full scope substance use disorder treatment for our incarcerated population, including all FDA approved forms of MAT. And that is included in the current RFP. And starting July 1st, whoever is taking on that contract will have the obligation during their 3-year contract to provide full substance use disorder scope of treatment, including all FDA-approved methods of MAT. Any questions?
I just want to thank you and Shayna Zerlin, who was a regular participant. She couldn't attend the last couple of meetings because of the birth of her first child, but she was very helpful and also offered her services as a counselor for any member of the task force who was dealing with the trauma that they might have heard about or experienced or reminded themselves of from the testimony we heard from people, from the courageous women who spoke during the process.
Morning, Chair Caput and Board of Supervisors. Fernando Giraldo, Chief of Probation. I just want to take a moment to first thank the task force, the wonderful work led by Dr. Susan Green and all the other members, a diverse group of stakeholders that helped inform a 2-year process. I think now is the heavy lift when we operationalize or implement the recommendations. And of course, couldn't help but notice that probation is included in 5 of those recommendations, and we are eager to support that, but seek your guidance in those efforts. But this is very exciting. 20% of those in the probation system are women. Today, we have 2 females in our juvenile hall, so it's critical for us to stop that cycle. So thank you, and we look forward to your support.
Thank you.
My name is Rocco Capella. I'm a parent of a student at Santa Cruz High. I'm also part of a faith-based community. Beverly Brooke is the one who told me about this meeting because we go to church together. So first I'd like to thank the advisory task force. I learned a lot this morning just from listening, so thank you for that. So there's 2 considerations I'd like to bring up. First is around restorative justice. I think that's a really important recommendation that the task force made. And I think there's a discussion about, can we expand this into comprehensive high schools? And I know that they talked about Sequoia High School in Watsonville, but it would be great if we could actually get, this pilot in a comprehensive high school in North County. Just I think having having different people in the county getting involved would be helpful. So, as a consideration. The other consideration is, Ferris Sabah over in the County Office of Education has launched a program where we're having these meetings with the county Department of Mental Health, kind of, and trying to think about, where does the overlap occur between, it's the teachers who are seeing the students on a regular basis every day. And so they see a lot of these issues coming up, and then how does county mental health kind of overlap, almost like a Venn diagram with the students in the middle. And so, obviously Ferris and I think Mimi Hall is kind of the leader on the county side. They know way more about this than I do, but just in terms of all these different initiatives going on, just considering kind of how we better maybe coordinate this and let the public know what's going on. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Natalie, and I just wanted to thank the board and everyone here that participated this morning. I was recently released from custody on January 13th, and I spent a decent amount of time at the Blaine Street facility in the last, I was there the last 6 months. So I just want to express my gratitude and my hopes that moving forward that women such as myself are survivors of domestic violence and of sexual assaults have a voice and have some more opportunities that a lot of women who are near and dear to my heart are still incarcerated, they're fighting for, that the resources are made more available to us upon release, that women specifically, not just at the Blaine Street facility, but at the main jail, are able to get more resources more easily. So I just want to thank you guys and express my appreciation, and optimism for everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward.
Hi, my name is Maria Luna. I'm an advocate at Monarch. I'm going to be reading a letter that one of my clients wrote. She wasn't able to be here today due to her new job. So I'll go ahead and read it. Hello, my name is Jessica. I'm writing this letter to say thank you to Monarch Services and my advocate. If it weren't for all the help you and your team has given me, I don't know where I would be. Probably out on the street, homeless, lost, on drugs, and on my way back to jail. I was in a really bad abusive relationship, afraid, angry, and confused, without hope. Today I have hope and a way out of that cycle. I was given shelter and food along with clothes, which helped me advocate for myself to find work, to get into a sober living house where I'm living now and thriving. With ongoing help and now enrolled at Cabrillo College, where I'll be getting a career while working part-time and doing community service. I'm still doing outpatient. It seems like a lot, but I can do it all along with my support and a car, which I finally got. So I'm doing so much better, making my appointments, my classes, and my meetings. I stress, but on time because the bus service doesn't help as much anymore. So again, thank you all from the bottom of my heart for all your continual help and support and for the positive attitudes. It all makes a difference in my life and has changed and saved my life. I just want to say that this client I saw for over a year at Main Jail in Blaine, she is a success.
Thank you, and thank you to Monarch Services. There were a number of people who participated in the task force, really made a difference, sharing stories, sharing your story, sharing the stories of the organization and what women go through, and your willingness to step forward and be part of solutions and these recommendations. Really makes a difference.
Good morning, board. My name is Delphine Burns. I'm also with Monarch Services, also here to share on behalf of a client who could not be here this morning but wanted her story shared. Our client came to Santa Cruz to visit a friend. During this visit, she went out with a group of friends, and at the end of the evening, her friends decided to go home. Our client said she would like to walk home to enjoy more of the sights of Santa Cruz as a visitor to the city. During her walk, she was assaulted and raped at a park. She went to the closest store with torn nylons, clothing ripped, and was yelling for help. She scared the customers and store owner due to her yelling, and they called law enforcement. She was then arrested because a mom at the store pressed charges due to her child being scared by our client's yelling. She was then incarcerated and told about Monarch Services by other incarcerated individuals. She requested to meet with a Monarch advocate through the crisis line, and then shared with us that she was scared and shared her story of the rape and arrest. She did not know when she would be released. She was then released unexpectedly on a Friday evening with the clothes she came in with, despite telling jail staff that she needed fresh clothing because of the rape. She did not have a cell phone or any identification due to her purse being lost at the scene of the rape and was therefore unable to contact us prior to her release. She ended up calling from a payphone, and we were then able to shelter her for the night, provide her with clean clothing, and provide transportation to return her to her hometown. If she had not had Monarch as a resource, she would have likely had to sleep on the streets, which would have been extremely dangerous and re-traumatizing. So this just speaks to the importance, of our recommendation of providing shelter and providing resources to those who are released unexpectedly. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Cheryl. I'm with Encompass Community Services, Adult Behavioral Services. I've had the opportunity to sit in the JAG meetings at the much later part of the task force meetings, and I must say that it's been an honor to hear, have a little voice to contribute and be a fierce advocate in championing reforms for women who are incarcerated, women who are suffering from substance use disorder. And with that, I want to say a big thank you to the board for this opportunity to be a part of it. Thank you to Susan, and we're not going to stop. For us, we're always going to be there. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Alyssa Tambora. First, I want to thank Dr. Susan Green for just her incredible work. I am an adult child of a previously incarcerated parent, and I'm here to support the recommendations of the Justice and Gender Task Force. Specifically, I'm here to urge you to adopt a diversion program for primary caregivers as an effort to reduce intergenerational trauma associated with incarceration. I want to just share a little bit of my experience. I was one of the children that got lost in the shadows with my parents' incarceration, and I'm one of the children of incarcerated parents that could have benefited from these recommendations. Children impacted by incarceration are victims of the criminal justice system, and it's our responsibility to reduce their trauma as much as possible. During my parents' absence, I suffered through sexual and physical abuse, food insecurity, economic instability, behavior problems, interruption of my education, and housing instability. When I was 15, I became homeless and became pregnant as a result of a sexual assault while literally sleeping on the streets. I dropped out of high school and turned to my own drug and alcohol abuse to cope. To say that life was overwhelming would be an understatement. Today I'm 26. I have a healthy, happy 9-year-old. I'm a student at UC Santa Cruz. I graduate this year and I'm applying to law school. And I can tell you that though my circumstances have completely changed and life has gotten better, my experiences as a homeless and pregnant teenager sleeping on the streets when my parent was incarcerated will stay with me forever. They have truly traumatized me. My experience is not unique, and that's why I'm here, to speak for those children of incarcerated parents that are living through these experiences right now and do not have the opportunity to be here. The children who have incarcerated parents deserve to be considered, deserve to have connection with their parents, and deserve resources to thrive. I can tell you from experience, and this is my point, that prevention is key. The recommendations from the Justice and Gender Task Force have the potential to make substantial impacts in the lives of families impacted by incarceration, and I strongly urge you to adopt them. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing your stories with the task force.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Monica McGuire from Corralitos, and I'm here unhappily representing dozens of families I've met personally and hundreds I've learned of that have nothing to do with the justice system, but because of the court system, are separated from their children. Parents regularly are told, child only needs one parent, and you're going to pay child support. That is harming dozens of families I can bring to you to meet you. I don't, because I've learned in the last 4 or 5 years, you stopped including public testimony as part of the record of these meetings. I think if you would please reinstate that public testimony is included in your action minutes, you could have a lot more data of people who have come. I've witnessed people coming here on most of these subjects. And the fact that they aren't findable in the records, the written records, isn't helping us. When this many people show up and give their heartfelt stories, their near disaster and disastrous stories, they can be added to the record, please. This is very important. As well, there are countless ways that you asked about where the money could come from. I have observed with the families that I've helped as a health and healing coach who are wrapped up in multiple systems of our health and human services, family court services, over and over, the DA, all of the offices that say their hands are tied. This county doesn't care about doing anything about domestic violence, is what I've been told. I understand that's not the view of individuals. That's the view of systems that haven't done this kind of beautiful working together. And I'm so grateful that you've listened as carefully as you have, because you do have power to have more say in making sure that the tens of thousands of dollars currently being spent keeping parents from their children could be solved with a few $100s to make sure that there's services to keep children with their parents, adults as well. I have multiple cases I could bring to you, and we are very hopeful that you'll keep looking at all of them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Becky Steinbruner. I live in rural Aptos. I want to thank Dr. Green for her excellent work and all of the presenters this morning. I remember Dr. Green's original presentation, and it was hard. It was hard to listen to. And so I am really glad that that has come forward with these very reasonable recommendations that the county adopt, and I urge you to do so. There are some that I think can be done right now and would cost nothing. Something as simple as the release time when women or anyone is incarcerated or released onto the streets in the early morning hours, in the evening. What are we doing here? We're just setting ourselves up for recidivism. Why don't we have clothes available for these people? The story of the young woman coming in, having been raped, didn't even get a change of clothes. That doesn't have to happen. That wouldn't cost much. We can even connect with the churches and have something there, some sort of support. but not just turn them back out on the streets with nowhere to go, no phone, no way to contact people that can support them, and in the same clothes that they were wearing when the crime occurred. That's a simple thing that doesn't cost anything at all. I also want to point out that the county has an interagency center that the taxpayers are paying a lot of money for. Why don't we make use of that? Why don't we take these people who are traumatized there and help them with counseling, clothes, connections? Let's make use of that. It's on the tax rolls, and it was reported in the strategic plan. It's not being used. Let's use it. I also want to speak a little bit about the actual safety in the jails. We've had, unfortunately, some rapes that occur within the jails. Let's work on stopping that right now. These people have already been traumatized, these women, and here they are being raped in the jails by law enforcement. That's unacceptable. I also want to speak to the issue of the rape kits and the forensic lab in this county, the lack of it. It was taken away, and now women have to go to San Jose in order to have the examinations for the rape kits that will help them prosecute and get some justice for the crimes that they have endured. Let's change that. And I understand that that will possibly change in 2023. Let's get it here now. We need to do that. It used to be here, and we need to restore the dignity and the safety of these people. When women, especially women who are perhaps more vulnerable, are released from jail, let's give them a voucher to a hotel where they can be safe. Thank you.
We'll bring it back to the board for a motion.
Chair, I want to thank again everybody who participated, groups that didn't get mentioned, Encompass and CASA, who were here, who played key roles in this effort, our Human Services Department, and others who made this task force process so rich. I'm grateful from them, even though we didn't hear from a lot of speakers from those organizations, but they played a critical role. I think I'll just, hearing from Dr. Newell about what's in the RFP for our medical services at the jail, it sounds like that the language there is inclusive of us being able to do the medication-assisted treatment.
We can take a look at it in more detail, and if it's not, we can supplement it.
Okay.
And when it comes time to get a contract in place, we can get it aligned.
Okay, super. Okay. And it sounds like the work of the CAO's office in bringing departments together will better define, and so for when we get that report back in August. Therefore, I would move forward all the recommendations from the Task Force on Justice and Gender, and would ask our county administrative officers to move quickly to bring an ordinance to establish the Commission on Justice and Gender, and offer our appreciation to everyone involved.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
We do. Okay. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposition? None. Passes unanimously.